Hello and welcome to Behind the Mask, Thriving in Healthcare, a podcast created for healthcare employees to explore not only issues relating to mental and emotional health, but also unique challenges that those working in healthcare are faced with. Your hosts are Adina Tucker, a licensed clinical social worker with Dartmouth Health, and Jennifer Hensey, an MSW also with Dartmouth Health. Have you ever been super stressed out or super sad or just not feeling great and you thought, you know what? I'm going to do a little retail therapy on myself. I'm going to treat myself. I'm going to get myself something nice, get myself something new. And I know that I do that. What that's called is emotional spending. And the reason why we're going to talk about that today is because it's just one of a bunch of different types of negative coping skills. And in a vacuum, they could be okay, but over time, it could become a much bigger issue. So, the way that you curb that is by increasing your emotional intelligence. So, that's what we're going to talk about this episode. What is it? How does it impact our lives? How do we cultivate and gain a higher emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is your ability to manage your own emotions, but also understand the emotions of other people. When you have a low emotional intelligence, you most likely have difficulty understanding and even identifying your own emotions, but also the emotions of others. You may struggle with regulating your emotions. They may get in the way of reaching your goals. You may be super reactive when things happen. And this can make it difficult for you to communicate with other people, especially if you're having, outbursts when you're faced with something that causes a lot of emotion instead of being able to control it and process it. And like I just mentioned, a lower emotional intelligence can also lead us to having some pretty unhealthy coping mechanisms. And one of those I started with is emotional spending.
Yeah, and emotional spending can easily get out of control. It's pretty much like anything that can be bad for you. When you do it consistently over time, it can have some pretty negative effects. Emotional spending can contribute to your overall financial stress, maybe not in the moment when you're getting that hit of dopamine, but afterwards when you start seeing your bank account or you get your credit card bill, you might start experiencing some much higher financial stress overall. Financial stress is so overwhelming and it can feel crippling. Research has also shown that those with financial stress were 20 times more likely to attempt suicide. Certainly, our financial situations don't happen in a vacuum, and there are many contributing factors to it. But it can't be denied that if you tend to be an emotional spender, more often than not, when you're experiencing emotional triggers, that's going to eventually increase your financial stress.
Absolutely. And emotional spending isn't the only maladaptive coping mechanism that is used when someone has a lower emotional intelligence. Substance abuse is another. Maybe you have a drink anytime an emotion is too big to handle. Once in a blue moon is reasonable, but if that becomes your constant coping plan, then you're starting to develop an issue. Procrastinating and avoidance are other forms of coping that aren't always best for us. Some people will also engage in lots of risk taking behaviors to get those dopamine hits and change their emotional state. You might be listening and recognize maybe you use spending as a coping mechanism when you feel stressed or something triggers you emotionally, or one of the other maladaptive ways of coping. So then let's think about how do we make a change so that we don't use retail therapy or anything else that could be harmful long term as a coping mechanism. And one way that we can do that is by developing and increasing our emotional intelligence.
Nadina, as you mentioned in the beginning, emotional intelligence, it's our ability to manage our emotions and also understand the emotions of other people. But there's different elements to emotional intelligence. The key components are self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. If you're a person with high emotional intelligence, you would be skilled at identifying your own feelings, knowing the meaning behind those feelings, but also understanding how your feelings then affect your behaviors. With other people, you can't and should not try to manage the emotions of others. However, if you can at least understand where they are coming from, then it can help guide you in interacting with them.
Absolutely. And It can help you manage and navigate situations in all your relationships, personal or work. So let's break down the components of emotional intelligence and see how we can increase our proficiency with each one, which will in turn raise our overall emotional intelligence. And then that will allow us to not only curb emotional spending, but any other harmful coping mechanisms that we might be using. So I'll start with self awareness. Self awareness on its own is a wonderful tool to have in your toolkit. Those who have high self awareness generally report just an overall better well being. What exactly is it? Well, self awareness is our ability to look inward at ourselves, but also to self evaluate. Once we do that, we're able to have a greater understanding of who we are, why we do things. A study from 2017 found that people who have high self awareness and regularly self reflect usually have a more positive self image and are able to understand others better as well. Usually, you'll gain better communication skills and just overall better well being. What is usually helpful for me are action steps. Okay, that's super cool. How do I do that? Let's look at some action steps to help you increase your self awareness. First, you need to start to look inward. Journaling regularly, daily if possible, is a great way to do it. And you can find all sorts of guided journaling as well if it's not something that you've done before and you feel like you need more guidance. But you could start with some questions such as, what was I thankful for today? What were the highs and lows of my day? Is there anything I could have done a better job of? Or is there an area where maybe I felt like I could use some support? It really helps you to evaluate your own headspace and what your own emotions are and what's difficult for you and also what's easy. Meditation and quiet reflection are also helpful. There are again all sorts of guided meditations that you can help to get you started if you are new to it. There are different apps like Insight Timer, Calm, and there are even some guided meditations on YouTube that you could use. Another thing that you could do to start increasing your self awareness is write down your values. What is important to you and why? These are things that help you to know yourself better. Anytime you have a very strong reaction to something, whether it's a conversation, something someone does, or even something you see on TV, take time to reflect on what you felt when you felt like that before and see if you can start to make connections between your emotions, your reactions, and past experiences. That's super helpful. And it's actually when I'm talking to someone, when I first start seeing someone for therapy, one of the things I always ask is if I want to really know who you are as a person, what's important for me to know about you? What do you value? What do you feel like really encompasses like who you are? And sometimes people are taken aback and they're like, I don't know, which is, can happen.
Hmm.
So it is a really important thing to consider.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do is if you feel grounded enough, you could ask for feedback about yourself from someone you love and trust. Tricky part about that is it's very easy to become defensive, especially if you were to hear something that triggers feelings of judgment or shame. So, would not go into asking for feedback if you don't feel super grounded and if you aren't in a place where you're fully able to hear whatever feedback is offered. So, if you're feeling like this is something you want to do, asking specifics like, what do you feel like is my greatest strength? Or what could I improve on as a friend or a partner? And also, what do they perceive your values as being?
Those are all really solid action steps you can take. So I'm going to look at self-regulation and how we can work on that one. So let's first talk about what self-regulation is. It's how we control our behavior, our emotions, and even our thought. Have you ever heard someone say, think before you speak? Well, that's part of self-regulation. Also, thinking before you act. Essentially, self regulation is how we take a minute between being disappointed or getting upset or angered to think before we say or do something. It helps us to better handle stress and disappointment as we move through life. We also use our self regulation skills to rebound from something disappointing or perhaps a personal failure. It helps us be more resilient. I'm going to talk about some skills you need in order to be efficient at self regulation. Some of these you'll notice were also helpful in developing your self awareness. The first is mindfulness. Mindfulness is, of course, the practice of being present, not letting your mind wander, but being present in the here and now. There's different ways to practice that. Being intentional about things you're grateful for is one. Putting in breathing techniques and meditation into your daily routine are also great ways to practice mindfulness. The next skill is cognitive reappraisal or reframing. This is also really useful if you suffer from anxiety. Essentially, you take the negative thought that you're experiencing and you reframe it. Here's an example. My coworker was very short with me when I said hello in the break room. Oh no, she must be angry with me. But if you were to reframe that, you might say, my coworker was short with me in the break room. She's probably feeling stressed about this big project that's due soon. By reframing the negative thought, you're able to refocus to something that's more probable of an explanation for your experience, and that also stops that negative thought spiral that it's so easy to fall into. If this is something you know you struggle with, you can find all sorts of info on thought or worry logs, how to keep track of these sorts of things. Or you can always seek out a therapist or counselor to really help you work through how to master reframing. Being aware of your emotions, pausing to think, and remembering that you always have an option in every situation, going toward the thing, avoiding it, or attacking it. And lastly, keep an eye out for how you're feeling. If you feel you're in a situation and you're becoming tense or maybe feeling jittery, notice that and maybe do some deep breathing or take a moment away from it.
That's really good information. I feel like reframing negative thoughts is one of the most helpful thing that I use with people who are struggling with anxiety or worries, but also just I mean, I personally use that. That's a skill that I developed and then I constantly use because it's so easy to spiral when someone has some sort of reaction, especially depending on what kind of environment you grew up in. And I think that being able to take a step away
Mm.
from it, and
Yeah.
also I feel like part of emotional intelligence is also the thought of if someone is angry with me, that's their responsibility to come to me and express that anger. It's not my responsibility to figure out why they're angry and fix the thing, right? It's my responsibility to be present when they bring it to me and all of that, but
Hmm.
it's not my responsibility to like dig it out and be a little angry detective.
Yeah.
So I think that's the reframing is really good for that because it also helps you kind of stay out of that overthinking. The next skill for developing high
Yeah.
emotional intelligence
Hmm.
is motivation. So, we all know what motivation is, it's what propels us to reach our goals. And there are four components to motivation. That's our own personal drive to not only achieve our goals, but to grow and improve as people, our actual commitment to the goals we set, the initiative we take, and our optimism. And optimism is important because it directly affects our resilience. And how resilient we are is how we're going to respond to adversity, either mistakes we make or things that happen to us. All of those things tie into our resilient and how resilient we are. If we encounter a roadblock or a bump in the road and we're able to see the situation for what it is and find a way forward, learn from whatever the situation was, or do we end up getting knocked completely down? The more optimistic we are, the easier it is to look at the bright side, maybe see a lesson in whatever the situation you encounter and move forward in a positive way. And it doesn't mean that you're just like, oh, this terrible thing happened. It's great. That's not what it means. It's more of not perseverating in the negative and letting that take over and kind of taking the lesson from it and accepting that, yeah, this kind of wasn't great, but I can move forward and not get bogged down by it. The parts of motivation that work together and ultimately serve as a part of our emotional intelligence can be cultivated the same way as anything else, really. You may need to give yourself a little push, set some small, realistic goals, and work to meet those. And then once we've experienced what it feels like
Yeah.
to work towards something and experience being successful at it, it'll be much easier to take initiative and work towards those bigger things that you really want to do.
Yeah, that is so true, especially when we're thinking about the snowball effect of progress. All the little moments of achievement add up. So, the next component that influences our level of emotional intelligence is, of course, empathy. Sometimes this can get confused with sympathy. But empathy is how well we're able to look at a situation from another person's perspective, their experience, and their life. It's almost putting yourself in their shoes. The reason why this is important is that when we're empathetic, well, for one, it makes us much better listeners, friends, parents, and partners. But the other thing that happens is we start to take things much less personally. We can see where someone's reaction to something might have a whole lot more to do with their own situation and their own stuff, which, by the way, is an official therapeutic term, than it does with you or your feelings about you or their feelings about you. And when we've reached that level of understanding, then we're able to step back and we start to get closer to being able to more easily take that pause instead of having a knee jerk reaction to something. And when we're able to do that, then it takes the air out of some of those high emotions that can put us in a place where we turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms like emotional spending. I once heard a great explanation of empathy as the platinum rule. So there's something called the golden rule, which is, treat others as you would have them treat you. But empathy is the platinum rule. So you treat others as you understand they would desire to be treated. So that's always a great little helpful reminder to me.
And let's see, the last component we're going to talk about that has to do with emotional intelligence are social skills. Social skills that you might want to work on developing more are things like active listening, verbal and nonverbal communication skills, and persuasiveness. Some things you
Hmm.
can start to work on to improve your social skills, doing things like asking open ended questions versus yes or no questions. This allows you to let the person you're interacting with give you more information, and
Hmm.
it allows for deeper connection and understanding, but it also allows them to drive the narrative a little bit. And you may get information that you may have missed out on if you just asked a yes or no question. You can also take notice of the social skills of others that you interact with. What's something someone else is doing well that maybe you could try to model, maybe try to use it, that same tactic or skill. Try to maintain eye contact when you're talking
Hmm.
to others. Maintaining eye contact shows that you're genuinely interested in what the other person's saying. It also allows you to show that you're paying attention, you're staying present. Watching your body language and your
Yeah.
nonverbals is another part of social skills.
Hmm.
This one resonates with me specifically because, have you ever heard someone say
Hmm.
that person could never be a good poker player, or maybe someone else has a
Yeah.
poker face? If you're someone who wears your emotions on your face, that might be something to work on. I definitely show my emotions on my face. With all of these, you know, cameras and things, sometimes that doesn't work very well for me. Some of these are easier to work on than others. If you Google active listening, there are tons of resources out there that can give you pointers and ways to interact and improve your active listening skills. Honestly, improving your emotional intelligence will help you to start to curb any things like emotional spending or procrastination, but it will also help with other areas you struggle with. Emotional spending is like anything else that we use to give us that feel good hit. Some people are emotional eaters and they eat when they're upset or feeling emotional. Some people drink when they're upset or they isolate. There are all sorts of maladaptive coping mechanisms that people use. And honestly, working on these areas that allow you to be more present, mindful, and self aware will help decrease any unhealthy coping skills that you may have.
That's great. I love that. And I think that all of this together, it really goes to show that emotional intelligence gives us the power to turn conflicts into opportunities and obstacles into growth because it can help us really get in touch more with our rational brain and empathize when tensions run high and make self-care a priority.
No, for sure. I think that it does a lot for our own mental health and self-image, but I just feel like the more you can work on these things and really improve, it's going to make your
Hmm.
relationships and your connections much more rich and
Yeah.
bring a lot more to your life
Hmm.
and less conflict, hopefully, or at least you maneuver it smoother.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, hopefully, all of this was helpful. Maybe it's given you some ideas of ways that you can improve your emotional intelligence or areas where maybe you want to focus a little bit. And if you want some support with that, you can always reach out to us through Cobalt and get connected with a therapist that can definitely help you improve some of these areas. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us this week. As always, if you'd like more information and support, please check out our site at dartmouth-health.cobalt.care for additional content, connection to resources, support groups that you can sign up to attend, or to connect to one of our clinicians for counseling, psychotherapy, or medication evaluation. We appreciate you listening and hope you have a wonderful week.